My husband said I was dragging him down, so I stepped away. Within a week, his world collapsed with no one to hold it up. For 8 years, I thought I was lucky. Derek was ambitious, charismatic, always networking at cocktail parties while I smiled beside him in expensive dresses he picked out. He was climbing the corporate ladder at a prestigious consulting firm. I was his wife. What he never mentioned at those parties was that I ran his entire life. I scheduled every meeting, proofread every presentation, and reminded him about his mother's birthday. I managed our household, paid our bills, and made sure his dry cleaning was ready before important pitches. When his boss invited us to dinner, I researched the restaurant, his boss's wife's interests, and current industry trends so Derek would sound informed. He called me his support system. I thought that meant partnership. Then came the promotion he'd been chasing for 2 years. Vice President of Strategy, corner office, 6-figure raise. The night he found out, I made his favorite dinner and bought champagne. He didn't touch either. Instead, he sat across from me and said, "I need to talk to you about something." My stomach dropped. "You've been amazing," he started, "which is how you know something terrible is coming. But I'm entering a new phase of my career. I need someone who can match my ambition, someone who elevates me." I stared at him. "What are you saying?" "I think you're holding me back," he said, not even having the decency to look guilty. "You're comfortable with our current lifestyle, but I need to think bigger. Network with the right people. You don't understand that world." The world I'd been helping him navigate for 8 years. "I want a separation," he continued. "I think we've grown in different directions." I sat there, numb, while he explained how he'd already talked to a lawyer, how he'd move into his friend's spare room, how this was best for both of us, how he needed space to focus on his career without domestic distractions. Domestic distractions. That's what I'd become. He left that night with 2 suitcases, leaving behind 8 years of marriage and a closet full of suits I'd organized by color and occasion. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just watched him go. What Derek didn't realize was that I wasn't just his support system. I was the entire foundation. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. Nothing. I didn't send his morning calendar reminder with the color-coded schedule I updated every Sunday night. Didn't confirm his lunch meeting with the potential client he'd been courting for 3 months. Didn't lay out his clothes for the investor presentation or make sure his laptop was charged and his backup files were synced to the cloud. I made myself coffee and sat on the couch in my pajamas until noon. It felt strange. Liberating. By day 2, his assistant called me, panicked. "Derek missed his presentation with the board," she whispered. "He showed up in jeans because he thought it was a casual meeting." The CEO was furious. He asked me why Derek wasn't prepared, and I didn't know what to say. "I'm no longer responsible for his schedule," I said calmly. "But you always," she started, then stopped. "Oh, the separation. Exactly." She was quiet for a moment. "Is there any way you could just, maybe for a few weeks, keep helping him transition?" "No," I said. "Derek wanted to handle his career on his own, so I'm letting him." Day 3 brought more calls. From his mother, angry that he'd forgotten her birthday and hadn't sent the flowers I always ordered in his name. From his boss's wife, confused why we'd canceled the dinner reservation I'd made months ago at the restaurant she'd mentioned wanting to try. From his gym, wondering about his expired membership that I'd been auto-renewing for 6 years. I answered none of them. Derek called on day 4. "Why didn't you tell me about the Henderson meeting?" he demanded. "You said I was dragging you down," I replied. I thought it best to step away completely. Silence. "This is childish," he finally said. "No," I corrected. "This is you handling your own life. This is what you wanted." "I needed space, not sabotage," he shot back. "I'm not sabotaging anything," I said. "I'm simply no longer doing unpaid work for someone who thinks I'm holding them back." He hung up. By day 5, the real problems started surfacing. His credit cards were declined at a client dinner because I'd always handled the payments and the automatic system had my email for notifications. The late fees were piling up. His car insurance lapsed because I'd been the one renewing it every 6 months. His doctor's office called asking why he'd missed his annual checkup that I'd scheduled 6 months ago for his diabetes management. His prescription was about to run out. I forwarded the voicemail to his number without comment. That weekend, I went to stay with my sister across town. She'd been divorced for 3 years and had warned me about Derek from the beginning. "He always seemed like the kind of man who'd take credit for other people's work," she said, while we drank wine on her balcony. "He took credit for my life," I replied. She raised her glass. "So show him what his life looks like without you." I'd brought my laptop and spent the weekend going through 8 years of digital records. Every calendar entry, every email I'd sent on Derek's behalf, every reminder I'd set, every task I'd completed. I'd been meticulous, always backing everything up to my personal cloud storage because Derek was terrible with technology. The sheer volume of work was staggering. I'd scheduled an average of 43 appointments per month, sent over 200 emails monthly managing his professional relationships, edited 76 presentations, researched 32 potential clients, maintained relationships with 18 key contacts, managed 12 household vendors, coordinated 4 major family events annually, for 8 years. My sister looked over my shoulder at the spreadsheet I'd created. "You basically worked a full-time job," she said, "without pay. Without benefits, without recognition." I thought I was being a good wife. "You were being an employee," she corrected. "And he fired you for asking for a promotion to partner." Monday morning brought a flood of texts from Derek. "The HOA is threatening a fine for the lawn. Where's the plumber's number? My suit for the investor meeting has a stain. How do I access our health insurance portal? The internet isn't working. What's the Wi-Fi password? Mom's calling about some family dinner. The car is making a weird noise. I can't find my passport. When is trash day? The mortgage payment didn't go through. What's our account number? The cleaning service canceled. How do I reschedule? My laptop won't turn on. Where's the warranty information? I read each one, responded to none. That afternoon, his mother called me directly. What have you done to my son? She screeched. I dragged him down, apparently, I said. So I stepped away. He's falling apart. He missed my birthday, his father's anniversary lunch, and he showed up to a family dinner in wrinkled clothes with food stains. He forgot his nephew's graduation gift. He didn't even know it was happening. I'd been the one reminding him about family events for years, buying the gifts, writing the cards in his name, making sure he called on important occasions. Perhaps you should ask Derek why he never learned to manage his own life, I suggested. She sputtered. You're his wife. It's your job to— I was his wife, I interrupted. He asked for a separation because I was holding him back. So I'm giving him the space he wanted to soar. You're being petty and vindictive, she snapped. I'm being absent, I corrected. There's a difference. She hung up on me. Week 2 started with Derek showing up at my sister's house at 7 in the morning. He looked terrible. His hair was unwashed, his shirt was buttoned wrong, and he had bags under his eyes. There was a coffee stain on his pants. We need to talk, he said. I crossed my arms. I'm listening. I made a mistake, he admitted. The separation? I wasn't thinking clearly. The stress of the new position, I said things I didn't mean. Which part didn't you mean? I asked. The part where I'm not ambitious enough? Or where I don't understand your world? Or where I'm dragging you down? His jaw tightened. All of it. I was overwhelmed. I took you for granted. I see that now. But I need you. Come home. Why? I asked. So I can go back to being your personal assistant? That's not fair. Fair? I laughed. Derek, do you even know what day the trash goes out? What our Wi-Fi password is? When your car registration expires? What pharmacy fills your prescriptions? What your mother's favorite flowers are? He stared at me. You don't need a wife, I continued. You need a life manager. And I quit. I closed the door in his face. Through the window, I watched him stand there for a full minute before walking back to his car. He sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, not moving. My sister appeared beside me. You okay? She asked. I'm better than I've been in years, I replied. The calls from his world continued throughout the week. His dry cleaner wondered about the 6 suits still waiting for pickup that I'd dropped off 3 weeks ago. His dentist's office left a message about his missed root canal appointment that I'd scheduled around his work travel. His boss's assistant called asking why Derek hadn't RSVP'd to the company gala, where he was supposed to be networking with potential clients. I forwarded every single call to Derek's number. One voicemail stood out. It was from his colleague, the one he'd always complained about, saying how surprised everyone was by Derek's recent performance issues, how people were starting to wonder if the VP promotion had been premature, how his name was coming up in unfavorable conversations. I saved that one, but didn't forward it. Week 3 brought the breaking point. Derek's assistant called me sobbing. He's going to get fired, she said. He missed another board meeting because he mixed up the date. He submitted a proposal with typos, wrong figures, and outdated client information. He forgot about a site visit with our biggest client. They called the CEO directly to complain. I don't know what to do. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because everyone knows you were the one keeping him together, she whispered. His boss actually asked me where you were. He said Derek's performance has tanked since the separation. He asked if there was a way to get you back involved. I didn't know what to say. Something in me softened, not for Derek, but for her. She was just trying to do her job, picking up pieces that weren't her responsibility. Tell Derek's boss the truth, I said. Tell him that Derek's success was never just Derek. She was quiet for a moment. You really kept track of everything? Every meeting, every deadline, every relationship that mattered to his career, every detail that made him look competent and reliable? That's not just a wife, she said. That's a whole operations team. Exactly. And operations teams get paid. The next day, Derek's boss called me directly. Harrison Reed, the CEO who'd given Derek the VP position. I need to understand what's happening, he said, his voice careful but firm. Derek's performance has become unacceptable in less than a month. This isn't the person we promoted. I need to know if there's something we should be aware of. I thought about protecting Derek, about making excuses, about saying he was going through a difficult personal time. But why should I? Derek asked for a separation 3 weeks ago, I explained. He told me I was holding him back from his ambitions, so I stopped managing his life. Managing his life? I scheduled every meeting, prepped him for every presentation, maintained every professional relationship, and ensured he never missed a single obligation, I said. I researched his clients, tracked his projects, reminded him of deadlines, edited his proposals, and made sure he looked competent and prepared. For 8 years. Silence on the other end. Derek didn't build his career alone, I continued. He had a full-time, unpaid chief of staff. Me. I was his calendar, his research department, his quality control, his relationship manager, and his memory. Without me, you're seeing what Derek actually is when left to his own devices. I had no idea, Harrison said quietly. We all thought, the way he presented himself, so organized and on top of everything. That was me, I said. All of it. Me. Why didn't he acknowledge this? Because he didn't see it as work, I replied. He thought I was just being a good wife, supporting my husband, doing what wives do. He never realized that what I was doing had actual monetary value, that it was skilled labor, that I was essentially working 2 full-time jobs, one paid and one not. After we hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years. The truth was out. Derek's perfect image was crumbling, and for once, it wasn't my job to fix it. Week 4 brought the collapse I'd been expecting. Derek showed up at my sister's house again. This time, he looked worse, desperate. There were actual tears in his eyes. Harrison put me on probation, he said, his voice cracking. I have 30 days to get my performance back to acceptable levels or I lose the VP position. They might demote me back to senior consultant. Everything I've worked for is falling apart. That's unfortunate, I replied. I need your help. Why would I help you? Because, he struggled, searching for words. Because we were partners. No, I corrected. We were never partners. Partners split the work equally. Partners respect each other's contributions. Partners don't tell each other they're being held back. You treated me like your employee without pay, without recognition, without even basic appreciation. I appreciate everything you did, he tried. Do you? I asked. Can you name 3 things I did for you last month? Specific things. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. You scheduled? He started. What did I schedule? I pressed. Which meetings? Which events? What else did I do? He couldn't answer. You can't, I said, because you never saw it as work. You never tracked what I did because in your mind, I wasn't doing anything. I was just existing around you, making your life magically function without effort. I'll do better, he promised. I'll acknowledge everything. I'll tell people you were part of my success. I'll give you credit. Just please help me through this probation period. I don't want acknowledgement, I said. I want a divorce. His face went pale. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. I spent 8 years making you look good while you took all the credit and none of the responsibility. Now I'm going to spend the next chapter making myself look good. What about everything we built together, he asked. You didn't build anything, I said. I built it. You just lived in it. That night, I filed for divorce. Not separation. Divorce. My lawyer was a woman my sister recommended. Sharp, ruthless, and very interested in my case. You managed his entire career? She asked, taking notes. I have documentation, I said, pulling out my laptop. I kept a detailed calendar of everything I did for him. Every meeting I scheduled, every document I edited, every relationship I maintained, email receipts, calendar histories, task lists, everything. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through 8 years of data. This is thousands of hours of professional work, she said. Executive assistant work, project management, client relations. This isn't just household management. This is career management. I know. I'm going to argue for compensation, she said. You essentially worked as his personal project manager, executive assistant, and consultant. Without pay. This is marital labor that directly contributed to his career advancement and earning potential. Will that work? She smiled. Let's find out. Illinois is an equitable distribution state, and you have documentation that would make any lawyer weep with joy. Over the next few days, my lawyer built a case that was ironclad. She found precedents in other states where spouses had successfully argued for compensation for career support. She consulted with economists who calculated what my services would have cost on the open market. The number was staggering, over $600,000 across 8 years. The divorce papers arrived at Derek's office 2 days later. According to my lawyer's contact there, he opened them during a meeting and went white. He excused himself and didn't come back. He called me immediately. You're asking for half my retirement and my VP bonus? He shouted. And a lump sum for professional services? This is insane. Your career was built on my unpaid labor, I replied calmly. I'm asking for compensation. That's not how marriage works. Actually, I said, that's exactly how marriage is supposed to work. Equal partnership. Equal division of assets and contributions. You just never saw my contributions as having value. You didn't work, he argued. You were just being supportive. Read the documentation attached to the filing, I suggested. Every email I sent on your behalf, every schedule I maintained, every presentation I edited, every client relationship I nurtured, every crisis I prevented. Then tell me I didn't work. I was your wife, he shouted. That's what wives do. No, I said. That's what employees do. And employees get paid. Either I was your partner, in which case I deserve half of what we built, or I was your employee, in which case I deserve back pay. Pick one. He hung up. My lawyer called an hour later, laughing. His attorney just contacted me, she said. They want to settle. Already? They reviewed your documentation. They know a judge will see this as unpaid labor, especially since you can prove his career advancement directly correlated with your management. They're scared of discovery because we might find even more evidence. And they're terrified of a trial because no jury will side with the guy who dumped his wife for being dead weight when she was actually doing all the work. What are they offering? Half his retirement, 30% of his VP bonus, and a lump sum of $80,000 for professional services rendered. They want to avoid a trial. I thought about it. About pushing for more. About making Derek suffer the way he'd made me feel small and unimportant. But I didn't need revenge. I needed freedom. Take the deal, I said. We settled 2 weeks later. The total came to just over $200,000. Enough to start over. To build something for myself. To never depend on anyone else's acknowledgement to feel valuable. Derek's mother tried calling one last time after she heard about the settlement. You've destroyed him, she said. He lost his VP position. He's been demoted back to senior consultant. His reputation is ruined. People at his firm are calling him a fraud. His colleagues whisper about him. He had to move out of his corner office. And you took half his money on top of it all. I didn't destroy him, I replied. I just stopped building him up. What kind of woman abandons her husband when he needs her most? The kind who finally realizes she deserves better, I said, and blocked her number. 6 months later, I used my settlement money to start a consulting business. Executive support services for high-powered professionals who recognized they needed help, but were willing to pay for it. My first client was Harrison Reed, Derek's former boss. I've been thinking about our conversation, he said during our initial meeting, how you manage Derek's entire professional life behind the scenes. I need someone who can do that for my executive team. Someone who can keep them organized, prepared, and effective. I'm very expensive now, I warned. He smiled. You're worth it. What you did for Derek for free would have cost him 6 figures annually if he'd hired a professional. We both know that. And now we're going to pay you what you should have been paid all along. My business grew faster than I'd expected. Turns out there were a lot of executives who needed operational support but didn't have unpaid spouses to exploit. Or they were smart enough to recognize that professional services require professional compensation. Within a year, I'd hired 5 employees and had a waiting list of clients. I was featured in a business magazine as a rising entrepreneur. The article title was, Behind Every Successful Executive, The Hidden Labor That Makes It All Work. Derek's mother sent me a copy with a hateful note scrawled across the cover. My sister framed it and hung it in my office. I ran into Derek at a networking event, 18 months after the divorce was finalized. He was there with a date, a young woman in a designer dress who laughed at everything he said. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, that familiar tight smile of someone doing too much. He saw me, and his face went tight. I was standing with Harrison and 2 other CEOs discussing a major contract. I smiled and walked past him to greet Harrison, who'd invited me as his guest and colleague. Good to see you, Harrison said warmly. I want to introduce you to some potential clients. They're looking for exactly the kind of comprehensive executive support you provide. As we walked away, I heard Derek's date ask, Who was that? No one important, Derek replied. I looked back once. Derek was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe. Or just the realization that he'd thrown away the best thing that ever happened to him. His date was checking her phone, already looking bored. I wondered how long it would take her to realize what she'd signed up for, how many of his meetings she'd end up managing, how many of his deadlines she'd track, how long before he told her she was holding him back too. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. Harrison and I spent the next hour discussing business. By the end of the evening, I'd landed 2 new contracts worth over $300,000 combined. That night, I went home to my new apartment downtown. The one I'd furnished myself, decorated myself, paid for myself. No one else's schedule to manage, no one else's success to build. Just me, my business, and the life I was creating for myself. I poured a glass of wine and sat on my balcony, looking out at the city lights. For 8 years, I'd been invisible. The woman behind the successful man. The support system no one acknowledged. The foundation everyone stood on, but no one saw. Now I was just successful. People knew my name, respected my work, paid me what I was worth. And when they introduced me at events, they didn't say, this is Derek's wife. They said, this is the CEO of Executive Edge Consulting. This is the woman who revolutionized executive support services. My sister called as I was finishing my wine. How was the event? She asked. I saw Derek, I said. She made a noise. How'd that go? He was there with someone new, I said. She looked miserable. He told her I was no one important. My sister laughed. The irony. I know, I replied. The woman who built his entire career is no one important. The woman who now runs a 6-figure business he could never build himself is no one important. He's still living in the past where you were invisible, she said. He can't see what you've become because it breaks his narrative. His loss, I said. Absolutely, his loss. After we hung up, I sat there for a while longer, thinking about the last 8 years. About all the work I'd done that no one saw. About how easy it had been for Derek to dismiss me because he'd never bothered to look. But I'd learned something valuable from those years. I'd learned that I was capable of managing complex operations, maintaining dozens of relationships, juggling multiple priorities, and making someone look brilliant. Now I was doing all of that for myself, and I'd never been happier. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I heard you're doing well. I'm happy for you. Derek. I stared at the message for a long moment, thought about all the things I could say, all the ways I could respond. Instead, I deleted it and blocked the number. Some people don't deserve a response. They just deserve to be forgotten. And as I turned off my phone and headed to bed, I realized something important. I'd spent so long being essential to Derek's life that I'd forgotten to be essential to my own. Now I was building something that no one could take from me. Success that had my name on it. A reputation I'd earned. A business I'd created. Derek had wanted someone who could match his ambition, someone who could elevate him. Instead, he got a separation that showed him exactly how high he could fly without the woman who'd been carrying him all along, which is to say, not very high at all. And me? I was soaring. 3 years after the divorce, my business had expanded to 3 cities, Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. I had 22 employees and contracts with some of the biggest firms in the country. I'd been invited to speak at conferences about invisible labor in professional settings. Universities were using my case study in their business ethics courses. I'd become the face of a movement I didn't know existed until I lived it. Women who'd spent years propping up their partners' careers without recognition, men who'd done the same for their spouses, people who'd finally realized that support work is still work. My TED Talk went viral. The title was The Price of Invisible Labor, What Happens When the Foundation Walks Away. Derek's colleague sent it to him, multiple times apparently. In the talk, I didn't mention Derek by name, but everyone who knew us recognized the story. I spoke about the cultural expectation that certain types of labor should be free, that love means service without compensation. That partnership means one person's career matters more than the other's. The comment section exploded. Thousands of people sharing their own stories. How they'd managed their partner's business while working full-time. How they'd edited dissertations, proofread articles, networked on behalf of spouses who took all the credit. how they'd been told they weren't ambitious when they were literally managing 2 lives. I received an email from Derek's assistant, the one who'd called me crying years ago. She'd left the firm and started her own consulting business, inspired by my story. "Thank you for showing me that our work has value," she wrote. "I spent 5 years making my boss look good while he took home bonuses and promotions. I thought that was just part of being a good assistant. Now I'm charging what I'm worth, and clients are paying it." I met her for coffee. Her name was Patricia, and she'd been working in administrative roles for 15 years. Always underpaid, always overworked, always told she should be grateful for the opportunity. Now she ran a boutique consulting firm specializing in executive operations. She had 6 clients and was turning people away. We compared notes on how to price services, manage difficult clients, and build sustainable businesses. By the end of our meeting, we decided to partner on a project helping administrative professionals transition into consulting roles. The project became a nonprofit within a year. We called it Foundation First. Our mission was to help people recognize and monetize the invisible labor they'd been performing for free. We held workshops in community centers, teaching people how to document their work, calculate their value, and negotiate for compensation. We created toolkits with templates for tracking labor, building portfolios, and pricing services. We offered microgrants to people starting their own businesses after leaving unsustainable situations. The response was overwhelming. Within 6 months, we'd helped 300 people launch their own consulting businesses. Within a year, that number had grown to over 1,000. Derek's mother sent me a letter during this time. Not hateful this time, apologetic. "I didn't understand what you were dealing with," she wrote. "I've been thinking about my own marriage, about all the things I did that my husband never noticed, about how small I felt when he dismissed my contributions, how I managed his medical practice for 30 years without a salary, without benefits, without even a title, how when he sold the practice, none of that money was considered mine even though I'd built the patient relationships, managed the billing, hired the staff. I owe you an apology, and my son owes you more than he'll ever be able to repay." I didn't respond to the letter. Some apologies come too late to matter. But I did think about her words, about how many women of her generation had lived the life I'd almost accepted, how they'd been told that invisible labor was love, that service without recognition was noble, that their worth came from how well they supported someone else's dreams. No more. At a charity gala 5 years after the divorce, I was honored as Entrepreneur of the Year by the Small Business Association. The award came with a $50,000 prize that I donated to Foundation First. During my acceptance speech, I told my story, not with bitterness, but with clarity. "I spent 8 years making someone else successful," I said. "And when he told me I was holding him back, I believed him for exactly 1 night. Then I woke up and realized something. If I could build his career, I could build my own. If I could manage his life, I could manage mine. If I could make him look brilliant, I could be brilliant on my own terms." The applause was deafening. I continued, "But this isn't just my story. This is the story of millions of people who perform invisible labor every day, who manage households, raise children, support partners' careers, all while being told they don't work, who carry the mental load of remembering birthdays, scheduling appointments, maintaining relationships, whose labor is so invisible that when they stop, everything falls apart, and people act surprised." More applause. I'm here to tell you that this labor has value, that you have value, that you don't need someone else's permission to recognize your own worth, and that when someone tells you you're holding them back, maybe, just maybe, you're actually holding them up, and it's time to let go. Standing ovation. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her hands were shaking. "I'm in the same situation you were in," she said. "My boyfriend is in law school, and I work 2 jobs to support us. I schedule his study time, proofread his papers, quiz him before exams, make sure he eats and sleeps. I manage our apartment, pay all the bills, handle everything so he can focus on school. Everyone says I'm so supportive, such a good girlfriend. But he told me last week that once he graduates and gets a job at a big firm, he'll need someone more sophisticated, someone who fits his future career, someone who went to the right schools and knows how to network with partners." "What are you going to do?" I asked. She smiled, and there was steel in it. "I'm going to stop paying his tuition, stop paying our rent, stop managing his life, and I'm going to use that money and that time to apply to law school myself. I got a 168 on the LSAT. I've been too busy supporting him to apply anywhere, but I'm done now." I hugged her. "Do it, and don't look back." She pulled away, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for showing me that I could." That moment reminded me why all of this mattered, why I'd fought so hard to prove my worth, why I'd refused to let Derek's narrative define me, because somewhere, there was always another person being told they weren't enough, that they were holding someone back, that their contributions didn't count because they weren't paid or weren't visible, that their labor was invisible because it came from love, and those people needed to see that there was another way. 7 years after the divorce, I sold my consulting business for $8 million. The company that bought it was a national firm that wanted to scale the model across the country. They offered me a position as chief strategy officer with equity and a salary that made me dizzy. I stayed on for 2 years, helping them expand to 15 cities, then stepped away to focus on Foundation First full-time. My sister threw me a celebration dinner when the sale went through. "Remember when Derek said you didn't understand his world?" she asked, raising her glass. I laughed. "I understand it better than he ever did, because I understand what it actually takes to succeed. Not just the visible work, but all the invisible labor that makes the visible work possible. And now you're teaching other people to see it too," she said. "That's the goal, to make invisible labor visible, to put a price tag on it, to force people to acknowledge what they've been taking for granted. We clinked glasses. I never married again, not because I was bitter or closed off, but because I learned something crucial during those 8 years with Derek. I learned that I didn't need someone else to feel complete. That partnership should add to my life, not define it. That I was enough, all by myself. I dated, had relationships that lasted months or even years, enjoyed companionship, intimacy, and connection without losing myself in it. But I never again made someone else's success my primary project. Never again scheduled someone else's life while mine waited in the background. Never again performed invisible labor without compensation or recognition. And I never dated anyone who expected me to. One relationship lasted 3 years. A man named Cameron who owned his own business and understood the value of time, labor, and partnership. He managed his own calendar, remembered his own obligations, and never once asked me to proofread his emails or remind him about his mother's birthday. When we eventually parted ways, it was amicable. No one was holding anyone back. We'd simply grown in different directions, and we were both secure enough to acknowledge it without blame. 10 years after the divorce, I received an invitation to speak at Derek's former company. They were implementing new policies around recognizing unpaid labor that spouses performed to support employees' careers. Harrison Reed, now retired but still on the board, had pushed for the changes. The company would offer stipends to spouses who provided career support. They'd create networking opportunities and professional development for partners. They'd acknowledge in performance reviews when an employee's success was aided by spousal labor. It was revolutionary for corporate America. I thought about declining the invitation, about avoiding any space where Derek might be, about keeping that chapter of my life firmly closed. But then I thought about all the young employees who needed to hear this message, all the spouses who needed to see that their labor had value, all the executives who needed to understand what they were asking of their partners. I accepted. The day of the event, I arrived early to set up. The conference room was packed. Over 200 employees, plus partners and spouses. And there, in the back row, sat Derek. He looked older, much older than 10 years should account for. His hair was mostly gray now, and he'd gained weight. Deep lines around his eyes and mouth. He was sitting alone. I gave my presentation. Talked about the real cost of invisible labor. Showed data on how many careers were built on unpaid spousal work. Explained the new tools companies could use to recognize and support employees' partners. The audience was engaged, asking questions, taking notes. Several spouses came up afterward to thank me, some crying. During the Q&A, Derek raised his hand. My heart pounded, but I called on him. He stood. Everyone in the room knew who he was. This was his company. These were his colleagues who'd watched his career implode a decade ago. I want to say something, he began. His voice shook slightly. Everyone here knows my story, how my career fell apart when my wife left. What they might not know is that it was entirely my fault. The room went silent. I spent 8 years taking credit for work I didn't do, he continued. I let my wife manage every aspect of my professional life while I pretended to be naturally organized and competent. When she stopped, I fell apart because I'd never actually learned to do my job without her. I told her she was holding me back. The truth is, she was the only reason I ever moved forward. He looked directly at me. I owe you an apology I'll never be able to properly make. You deserved a partner. You deserved recognition. You deserved compensation. Instead, you got dismissal and abandonment. I'm sorry. I nodded. Thank you for saying that. The room erupted in whispered conversations. I finished the Q&A and spent another hour talking to employees and spouses. By the time I finished, Derek was gone. I found a note tucked under my car's windshield wiper. I've been sober for 3 years, it read in Derek's handwriting. Working with a therapist on understanding why I treated you that way, why I couldn't see your value, why I thought success meant doing everything alone. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that you were right about everything, and I was wrong about everything. I hope you're happy. You deserve it. I folded the note and put it in my pocket. I was happy, not because Derek finally understood, not because he'd apologized, but because I'd built a life that didn't need his validation to be real. That night, I drove to my sister's house. We sat on her balcony drinking wine like we had a decade ago when my life was falling apart. Derek apologized today, I said, publicly. She raised her eyebrows. How'd that feel? Anticlimactic, I admitted. I thought I'd feel vindicated or satisfied or something, but mostly I just felt neutral, like he was apologizing to a stranger. That's growth, she said. You've moved so far past that chapter that his apology doesn't even register as important. I never thought about it that way. You spent 10 years building something he could never touch, she continued. Why would his opinion matter now? She was right. Derek's apology didn't change anything because I'd already changed everything myself. 15 years after the divorce, Foundation First had helped over 10,000 people recognize and monetize their invisible labor. We'd influenced policy in 12 states. Several countries had reached out asking how to implement similar programs. We'd changed conversations about what counts as work. And me? I'd become someone I never imagined during those 8 years of managing Derek's life. I was the CEO of a national nonprofit with an annual budget of $8 million. A sought-after speaker who'd addressed audiences on 4 continents, a mentor to hundreds of people building their own paths, an author whose book on invisible labor, titled The Foundation Tax, had been required reading in business schools and sociology departments for 3 years running. The book had started as a memoir but evolved into something bigger. Part personal story, part research study, part manifesto. I'd interviewed over 500 people about their experiences with invisible labor. The stories were heartbreaking and infuriating and ultimately hopeful. One chapter focused on mothers who'd left careers to support their husbands' relocations, only to find themselves unemployable years later with no credit for the project management skills they'd developed running households. Another examined graduate students who'd proofread and edited their partners' dissertations, essentially co-authoring work they'd never be credited for. A third looked at the invisible labor performed in professional settings, how administrative staff made executives look competent while earning a fraction of the salary. The book had sparked policy discussions. Several universities now offered stipends to graduate student spouses. Some companies had implemented partner recognition programs. A few states were considering legislation around compensation for career-supporting labor in divorce proceedings. Derek bought a copy, according to mutual acquaintances. He'd highlighted almost every page. I received occasional updates about his life through the professional network we still partially shared. He'd never remarried, never regained the career momentum he'd had before our separation. He was still at the same firm, still a senior consultant, passed over for promotions twice. His colleagues said he'd become quiet, reflective. He attended every workshop on invisible labor that the company offered. He volunteered with organizations supporting domestic violence survivors. He donated to Foundation First every year, always anonymously. But my assistant recognized his name on the bank transfer. I didn't know what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to believe people could change. Another part remembered how small he'd made me feel, how easily he'd dismissed 8 years of work, how quickly he'd decided I was the problem. Both things could be true. He could be genuinely remorseful and working to be better, and I could still never want him in my life again. 20 years after the divorce, I was invited to testify before Congress about invisible labor and economic policy. The hearing focused on how to account for unpaid labor in GDP calculations, how to protect spouses who sacrifice careers for their partner's advancement, how to ensure that divorce proceedings fairly divided not just assets but the value of invisible labor. I sat at the witness table, looking out at the committee members, knowing millions of people were watching on television. I told my story again, but this time, it wasn't just mine. It was the story of everyone who'd ever been told their work didn't count because it wasn't paid. Everyone who'd built someone else's success while their own potential remained untapped. Everyone who'd been invisible for so long they'd started to believe they didn't exist. The testimony went viral. The hashtag #InvisibleNoMore trended for 3 days. Thousands of people shared their stories. The pressure on lawmakers intensified. 6 months later, the Economic Recognition Act passed. It wasn't everything we'd hoped for, but it was a start. Spouses who provided significant career support could now receive compensation in divorce proceedings. Unpaid labor would be factored into retirement calculations. Companies that implemented partner recognition programs received tax incentives. I was invited to the bill signing. As I watched the president put pen to paper, I thought about the woman I'd been 20 years ago, sitting on the couch in my pajamas, wondering if I was being childish for refusing to keep managing Derek's life. That woman had no idea what was coming. The pain, yes. The divorce, the fighting, the fear of starting over, but also the growth, the business, the nonprofit, the movement, the realization that she was capable of so much more than being someone's support system. I wished I could go back and tell her it would be okay, that stepping away from Derek wasn't the end. It was the beginning. My phone rang. My sister. "Are you crying?" she asked. "Happy tears," I said. "We did it. We actually did it." "You did it," she corrected. "You took your pain and turned it into something that helped millions of people. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have," she said, "but I'm glad you didn't have to." That night, I attended the celebration reception. Lawmakers, activists, survivors, people who'd helped fight for this legislation. Everyone was jubilant. A young woman approached me. She looked vaguely familiar. "I don't know if you remember me," she said. "We met about 15 years ago. I was the girl whose boyfriend told her she wasn't sophisticated enough for his future law career." I remembered. The girl who'd been paying his tuition. "I remember," I said. "You were going to apply to law school yourself." She smiled. "I did. I graduated in the top 10% of my class. Worked as a public defender for 5 years, then joined the ACLU. I've been working on this legislation for 3 years. I'm here today because of what you told me that night, that I could do it, that I should." I hugged her. "Look at you now. Look at us," she corrected. "We're changing things, making sure the next generation doesn't have to choose between supporting someone they love and building their own life." "That's the dream," I said. 25 years after the divorce, I stepped down as CEO of Foundation First. I was 62 and ready to slow down. The organization was strong, with a new generation of leaders ready to take it further than I ever could. I moved to a small town on the coast, bought a house with a view of the ocean, spent my days writing, consulting occasionally, and enjoying the quiet. My sister visited often. We'd sit on my porch drinking wine, watching the sunset. "Any regrets?" she asked one evening. "About Derek?" I asked. "About anything." I thought about it. About the roads not taken, the life I might have had if I'd stayed, if I'd kept being invisible. "None," I said. "Every choice I made after he left led me here, to this life, this peace, this knowledge of who I am and what I'm capable of." She smiled. "That's the best revenge, not needing it anymore." A few months later, I received a letter from Derek. "I'm dying," it began. "Cancer. Stage 4. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe less. I don't expect you to care. I don't expect anything from you, but I wanted to write this while I still could. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too stupid to see it. I threw away our marriage because I was scared. Scared that if people knew how much you did, they'd realize I wasn't actually that talented, that I was just a mediocre man with an extraordinary wife. I've spent the last 25 years watching you build something beautiful, something meaningful, something that's changed the world. And I've spent those same years stuck in the same place, wondering what I could have been if I'd let you be my partner instead of my employee. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking you to visit or call or acknowledge this letter. I just wanted you to know that I see you now. I see everything you did, everything you were, everything you are. You were right. I was nothing without you, and I've been nothing ever since. Thank you for showing me what it means to actually matter. I read the letter 3 times, felt nothing, then something, then nothing again. I didn't respond. Derek died 4 months later. His obituary listed his accomplishments, his time at the firm, his volunteer work. It mentioned a former spouse but no name. I didn't attend the funeral, sent no flowers, made no statement, but I did think about him, about the man he'd been when we met, full of ambition and charm, about the man he'd become during our marriage, taking and taking without seeing what he was taking, about the man he'd apparently tried to be in the years after, sober, reflective, attempting to make amends. I hoped he'd found some peace before the end, not for his sake, but because peace is something everyone deserves eventually. My sister asked if I was okay. I'm fine, I said. He was part of my life for a long time ago, but he hasn't been for longer. I grieved the years I lost to him, not the man himself. She understood. 30 years after the divorce, I was 71 years old. Foundation First had expanded internationally. The Economic Recognition Act had been strengthened twice. Dozens of countries had implemented similar policies. My book was in its 23rd printing. Universities taught courses on invisible labor. The conversation had fundamentally shifted. And me? I was content. Writing memoir essays about aging, about building a life that mattered, about learning to see your own value. I'd never remarried, never found another partnership that felt right, and I was okay with that. I'd learned the most important lesson of all. I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I was already whole. My husband had said I was dragging him down, so I stepped away. His world collapsed with no one to hold it up. But mine expanded in ways I never imagined possible. And in the end, that's what mattered. Not his failure, but my success. Not his recognition, but my own. Not his apology, but my peace. I'd stopped being his foundation and became my own, and I'd never looked back.